For over 3 centuries, the Romanov Dynasty ruled Russia, transforming a vast, backward state into a sprawling empire that stretched from Poland to the Pacific. Their story is a dramatic and often brutal saga of immense power, sweeping reforms, and a spectacular downfall that ended in a bloody revolution. The Romanovs presided over Russia's rise as a European power, but their inability to adapt to a modernizing world led to their complete annihilation, a tragedy that changed the course of history. The Romanovs' tale is not simply a narrative of rulers and conquest, but a deeply human story of ambition, family, and a royal family's fight to hold on to an antiquated system in a world that had moved on. Their end was a direct consequence of their imperial history and their failure to see the brewing storm of revolution. So, how did a small noble family come to rule Russia? Who were the powerful figures who defined their dynasty? And what were the tragic, final moments that brought the Romanovs to their bloody end? The rise of the Romanovs, a time of troubles. The Romanov dynasty was born out of chaos. In 1598, the death of Tsar Fyodor I ended the Romanov dynasty, which had ruled Russia for over 700 years. With no clear successor, Russia was plunged into a period of civil war, foreign invasion, and famine known as the Time of Troubles. A series of impostors, peasant revolts, and Polish occupation brought the country to the brink of collapse. To restore order and unify the country, a national assembly of nobles, clergy, and peasants met in 1613. Their choice was Mikhail Romanov, a 16-year-old boy from a respected noble family with close ties to the previous dynasty. His election was a compromise, and his youth and inexperience were seen as a benefit, as he was a neutral figure who could bring peace. Mikhail's reign 1613 to 1645 began the long and difficult process of consolidating power and ending the internal strife. The early Romanovs spent the next century quashing rebellions, regaining lost territory, and strengthening the autocratic power of the Tsar. The Age of Reform, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, the dynasty's most transformative figures, were its 2 great reformers, Peter the Great and Catherine the Great. Peter reigned 1682 to 1725, was a towering figure in every sense, standing over 6.5 feet tall. He recognized that Russia was far behind the rest of Europe in technology, military power, and culture. He was determined to change that. In a famous tour of Europe, Peter worked incognito in shipyards and factories, absorbing Western knowledge. He returned with a ruthless determination to modernize Russia. He imposed a policy of westernization, forcing the Russian nobility to shave their traditional beards and adopt European clothing. He built a new, modern army and navy, establishing Russia as a significant military power. His greatest achievement was the founding of a new capital, St. Petersburg, on the Baltic Sea, a window to Europe that symbolized his break from Russia's past. Through sheer force of will, Peter dragged Russia into the modern world. A century later, Catherine the Great reigned 1762 to 1796 continued Peter's legacy. A German princess who came to power after a coup against her husband, Catherine was an ambitious and intelligent ruler who corresponded with Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire. She expanded the Russian Empire's borders to the south and west, acquiring vast territories, including a warm water port on the Black Sea and large parts of Poland. Her initial attempts at implementing liberal reforms, however, were curtailed by the large-scale Pugachev Rebellion 1775, a peasant uprising that made her fear social unrest and led her to adopt a more repressive stance. The 19th century. A slow decline. The 19th century was a period of increasing pressure and internal contradiction for the Romanovs. While Russia emerged from the Napoleonic Wars as a major European power, having defeated Napoleon's Grande Armée in 1812, the victory papered over deep-seated problems. Russia remained a feudal autocracy in a rapidly modernizing world. Tsar Alexander II reigned 1855 to 1881 recognized the need for a change. In 1861, he enacted his most significant reform, the emancipation of the serfs, freeing 23 million Russian peasants from bondage. This reform was a monumental step, but it was flawed and failed to give the newly freed peasants enough land, creating a new class of poor and disgruntled farmers. Despite these great reforms, Alexander II was assassinated by revolutionaries in 1881, leading his successor, Alexander III, to return to a policy of harsh political repression and reactionary rule. The final Tsar, Nicholas II, and the winds of revolution, the final Romanov Tsar, was Nicholas II, reigned 1894 to 1917. He was a kind and devoted family man, but he was a weak, indecisive, and unprepared ruler for the challenges of the 20th century. He believed in the divine right of the Tsar and resisted any move toward a constitutional monarchy. The first major blow to his reign was the disastrous Russo-Japanese War 1904–1905. Russia's humiliating defeat at the hands of a small Asian nation exposed the Tsar's military incompetence and ignited domestic unrest. The situation came to a head on Bloody Sunday in 1905, when Imperial guards fired on a peaceful protest march of workers and their families in St. Petersburg, killing hundreds. This event shattered the people's faith in the Tsar. It triggered the 1905 revolution, a wave of strikes and protests that forced Nicholas to grant some civil liberties and create an elected parliament, the Duma, though he often dissolved it when it challenged his authority. The final, fatal mistake was Nicholas's decision to lead Russia into World War I. The war proved to be a catastrophe. Russia's ill-equipped army suffered catastrophic losses against Germany. On the home front, the war effort led to severe food shortages, hyperinflation, and a complete breakdown of the economy. The Tsar's decision to take personal command of the army at the front, leaving his unpopular German-born wife, Alexandra, and the manipulative faith healer Grigory Rasputin to influence the government, completely destroyed any remaining public trust. The end of the Romanovs, revolution and execution by early 1917, the country was at a breaking point. In February, a wave of strikes and protests in Petrograd, St. Petersburg spiraled into a full-blown revolution. Facing a general collapse of his authority and with his army's loyalty in question, Nicholas II was forced to abdicate on March 15, 1917. The Romanov family was placed under house arrest, marking the end of 300 years of imperial rule. In October 1917, Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks seized power in a coup, establishing the world's first communist state. As the civil war between the Bolsheviks, Reds, and their opponents, Whites, raged, the Romanov family was moved to the provincial city of Yekaterinburg. As the White Army approached the city, the local Bolshevik council, fearful that the Romanovs would be rescued and become a rallying point for the anti-Bolshevik cause, made a decision to execute them. In the early morning hours of July 17, 1918, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, their four daughters Olga, Tati, and Umria, and Anastasia, their son Alexei, and four loyal retainers, were led into the basement of the Apativ house and were brutally executed by a firing squad. The bodies were then taken to a remote forest, mutilated with acid, and buried in a crude, unmarked grave to prevent their discovery. The finality of their execution was intended to be a powerful symbol of the complete destruction of the old regime. Legacy and conclusion. The Romanov dynasty's legacy is a tapestry of triumph and tragedy. They took a disparate nation and built a powerful empire, one that stretched across 3 continents and stood as a major force in global politics. Peter the Great and Catherine the Great were transformational figures who changed the course of Russia's development. However, the Romanovs' rigid autocracy and their brutal opposition to reform in the face of a modernizing world made them a liability. Their failure to share power, their insensitivity to the suffering of their people, and their disastrous military decisions ultimately brought about their own destruction. The tragic, brutal fate of the Romanov family has become a powerful and enduring symbol of the end of the old world and the violent birth of a new, often terrifying one.